This is Jerome Davis. I'm the artistic director of Burning Coal Theater Company, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Into the Fire, the Burning Coal Theater Company podcast series on all things theatrical. Our guest today is Byron Jennings, who has appeared in one of our shows so far in the 27th season, but will be appearing in two more before the season's done. And so we thought it would be a good idea to bring Byron in and talk with him a little bit about the work, his work as an actor, and the work that we're doing with the company this year. So Byron Jennings, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us again. This is your second shot at the podcast series.
Yes.
And so let's start off just by talking about Hymn, which is the play H-Y-M-N, Hymn, by Lolita Chakrabarti, which will open on January 25th of 2024 and run for 3 weeks through February 11th. So tell us a little bit about Hymn. You have been doing a deep dive into it.
Yes.
What can you tell us?
So, it is a fantastic play about relationships, particularly between two brothers who didn't know each other existed until they meet at their father's funeral. Right. And then they go on a journey of, I think it's a play about acceptance. It's a play about generational trauma. I think trying to live up to parental expectations, building community, nostalgia. The two characters get very nostalgic along the way, particularly with music. So it's a very cool play with some musical elements that I'm really excited. Some of these songs, I was a kid when a lot of these songs that we reference was released, but very, very excited to dive into that.
And the music is sort of a connective tissue between the two brothers, I guess you'd say. They don't know each other. They've never met each other. They, for all intents and purposes, have lived diametrically opposed lives.
Absolutely.
But the music is the one bond that they have that brings them together a little
Absolutely.
bit. At the beginning. Tell us about your character. The two characters are played by Juan Isler and yourself. And your character has made a business.
Yes.
Right? And tell us a little bit about that
Sure.
aspect.
So my character's name is Gil, and Gil has sort of gone into the family business. Right. He's a guy who's tried to live up to his father's expectations his entire life. He is one of four. I think he's the only son in the family, so he has older sisters, and so he's trying to live up to their expectations, his father's expectations, and he sometimes stumbles along the way, but he has a lot of ideas about what he wants to do and how he wants to implement those ideas. And he wants to, once we meet the brother, he wants to sort of incorporate him into some of his, I don't want to say schemes, but kind of a scheme, shenanigans. And so he's a man who, once he puts his mind to something, he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. I have this idea. I can get the money from this resource. We're going to get this building and all these things. So he has all these ideas and he wants to implement them. And he thinks that it's going to set him on the path of success.
Has your have you thought about what that business is yet? What he's involved with? The play doesn't really make it that clear.
Stationary, which is an interesting business to go into. Which is actually, now that I think about it, and the fact that we talked about, before we went on mic for this, we talked a little bit about me appearing in art. And one of the characters in art, if you remember, Stationary was his business. And I think it was the character played by Juan.
Interesting.
So it's interesting that this time around, I'm reuniting with Juan, who is just hilarious and giving and such a great guy. So I'm glad that we get to go on this journey together.
You have to be on your toes.
Absolutely, with Juan. And I love it. Yeah. I love that Juan will keep you on your toes, but he's giving on stage, and we just have the best time. But Gil wants to go into the stationery business.
And so we're thinking about like just a shop somewhere, like a stationery shop?
Yes, stationery shop, but not just any kind of stationery. It's going to be very fancy. It's going to appeal to the businessmen in the area. And he has an idea of them coming in and ordering something that is super fanciful and expensive and paying a lot of money. Right. And it's going to take off.
Right. And what had you been doing? Because your character is probably in his late 40s, I would guess.
Late 40s, yeah.
What has he been doing before that?
So the father's business was in tailoring and clothing. So to kind of keep that going, he's been doing a lot with that. But that's not what he's wanted to really do. Yeah. But his father was a demanding person, an exacting person. And so he felt, if I'm going to stay in those good graces and not seem like a failure to my father, then I need to toe the line. I need to do the family business. Right. But that's not what he's wanting to do.
Right. That's there's a little bit of parallel with your own life. I'm thinking, because I know you went in an entirely different direction at one point.
So, oh gosh, when I was 9, I made a declaration to my parents that I was going to become an attorney. Okay. Have attorneys in the family. They said, okay, that's great. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. And so I, throughout, 9, elementary school, middle school, high school, that was the track. Yeah. My degree is in political science, which a lot of attorneys, that's typically what they do. So I said, all right, before I head off to law school, it would be nice to work in a firm to see if it's really what I want to do. And thankfully, a fellow theater actor in the area, Seth Bloom, who I appeared... he was a guest artist when we were doing a play, Boys in the Band, at NC State. Yeah. And so once I graduated, Seth and I kept in touch, and I'd done a show with his wife, Rebecca, and ended up coming to the firm and managing the firm for 17 years, and they taught me how to go into law school. Wow. Seth and the other partner, Howard, said, is this really what you want to do? Yeah. So I ended up managing a law firm. So I was close for 17 years. But my grandparents in particular were not very happy about that. One time they came to visit and they said to the partners, why is our grandson not in law school? Right, And I was like, don't do, you're going to cost me my job, Grandma and Grandpa. But they much like Gil's father, my grandparents are amazing people. They're both college educated in the 50s, in a time where actually a lot of, regardless of your race, a lot of parents didn't go to law school, but two black grandparents who are both college educated. It was a bit of a rarity.
It's still under 30% of
right.
the entire population of the country. So that would have been, 70 years ago, that would have been extraordinary for any family.
Absolutely. And, I learned... My grandmother just celebrated her 85th birthday. Yeah. And I learned, it's so funny how with each birthday and each year, you just learn something sort of new about your family. Yeah. But my grandmother tells a story how she was valedictorian of her class in 1956. And she walks into the University of Florida, the registrar's office, and they proceed to hand her a maid uniform, thinking she was there. And she said, no, I'm here to register for classes. I'm valedictorian of my class. Yeah. And they said, this is the University of Florida in Gainesville. We don't accept black people.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And so she ended up going to an HBCU, graduating with a degree in classical music and piano. She's a classical vocalist, and she plays amazing piano, and went on to do some amazing things. She went on to become First Lady of Gainesville when my grandfather was mayor in 1998. Yeah. And the great thing is, when we celebrated her this past, in August, her birthday is in June, but we celebrate in August, she was given a key to the city. And how amazing that all these years later.
The transfer of focus from that very dark, hateful period to something not really. I mean, there's still vestiges of it, but there's also huge progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So, see, those kinds of things, my grandparents had very high expectations for us. They said, you you know about some of our experiences, so we expect you to soar. And they were very, I would always say, I have a fantastic job. I run a law firm. Like that is an incredible job, but they wanted more. And so I understand that with Gil, that there was always an expectation of more. They're proud of me, but they've always, so everything. Now just my grandmother is living. My paternal grandfather passed in 2020, but even with my grandmother, when I went to the birthday celebration, she hugs me, tells me how much she loves me because I'm her firstborn grandson, and but she also says, when is law school?
Why aren't you?
Yeah. I'm 43 now, but I guess
Well, it's never too late.
That is very true.
But you are working for a business now that's kind of a dream job for you, right?
Yes, I am working for, funny enough, a beach shade company started by three really good friends of mine that it's just taken off. And so they sort of lured me away from the firm, and I'm head of their customer service division because I like working with people and working with clients and other attorneys. They said, you know what, we want you to come over here and help build this division in our company, and it's been 2.5 years. It's been fantastic.
It's great.
It's been a fantastic job.
I've felt that every time I've talked to you about that subject. I felt like you were just, not that you were unhappy before, but I felt like there was just an explosion of happiness and positive feelings.
Absolutely. And working at the firm, I have to say, was great. I grew up there. I was at the firm from the ages of 23 to 40. So the partners were like dads to me. And so I still keep in touch, and I still go by for dinner or lunch. And so I was really fortunate to learn a lot. And they were super supportive of my theatrical career as well.
Seth
and Seth and I, back in 2008, we did Othello together. He was Iago, I was Othello, and on our lunch break, we were going to each other's offices, shut the door, and run lines. Just run lines. We're like, if it's not an emergency, do not disturb either one of us. We need to get these lines.
Just imagining a client walking by, hearing that language and going, wow, this is a high-end law firm.
Right. We had a couple of the paralegals and other staff members were like, hey, they were sort of listening as we were running lines because we would run them in character, definitely not sotto voce, and it was just,
very funny. So the other thing about him that I think is really interesting is I think part of the play has to do with the unknown presence in a person's life. And in this case, I mean, we could talk about the father, but he's dead before the play begins.
Right.
But there's a brother, there's this brother that your character, well, neither of you ever knew existed before. And it seems to me that realization that I wasn't alone all that time, if I had just, known it, and then trying to rush to figure out who that person is and how they fit into your own life and stuff like that is a very joyous idea. It's sad in a way because you realize all the time that was lost.
Right.
But there's also something very joyful about realizing that I wasn't alone all that time.
Yeah, and very brave.
Yeah.
To even decide that, to sort of take the plunge and go to this person and say, I know of you. Here I am. Where do we go from here?
Right, because you never know what's behind that door.
Right.
When you open the door.
Absolutely.
And it's so the play is quite a joyous experience in my estimation. I mean, I saw a production of it previously in England, and I felt that the audience response to it was one of welcoming. You felt like the audience was just wrapping the characters in their arms and vice versa throughout the play. So let's shift gears then and talk a little bit. So you've come down really fairly soon from Arcadia.
Right.
It's like coming off of stilts. I imagine.
I'm still on a high from that show.
Yeah.
Really.
Why did it work like that? Even one of the critics talked about the palpable ensemble feeling among the cast.
Yeah.
When the critics are noticing that, maybe we'll edit that part out. When the audience is noticing something like that, I feel like it means that it's really, really happening. Why was it happening? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We are a close cast, so we text almost every day.
Why? Because every cast doesn't.
Well, first of all, thanks to you. Like, you cast the show. You brought us together. Yeah. So thank you, first and foremost, for that. I don't really know how to describe it other than from that first table read, we all looked at each other and we were thinking, okay, like, we're here to work and we're going to make some discoveries. And then as we got, and even though essentially you have at some points like two different shows, right. So after we talked about this a little bit with our reunion on the telethon, that we had about a week-long table read, right. And then the 1809 cast and the 1993 cast didn't see each other for a couple of weeks, right. Because that's just the way,
we rehearsed.
But even then, it was nice, though. We did have a little bit of overlap where, if they were rehearsing for a couple of hours and then we would arrive, we got to see what they were doing.
Be in there in the room.
Yeah. And I think there was just a lot of awe and respect for each other's talents. And there was a tremendous amount of talent on that stage. Yeah. And they were, on top of that, really good people.
Right.
I mean, backstage,
Friendly.
we got along so well in the dressing room. We talked about all manners of things, and we just were there for each other. If someone needed, I remember a button popped off a costume, and I forgot who it was, but it's just like, okay, I'll take it, I'll sew it back on. I think it was Daniel. I think it was Daniel who said, and so Daniel, who was 2 seats down from me in the dressing room, just like, sitting there, and we're always running lines because that's one of the
so many of them.
There was so many of them. So that was one of the few shows where you would see each of us in our script in the dressing room before the show, just making sure. I would run various monologues. I like to do this thing in my process where, how do I describe it? It is I almost like to surprise myself with so I'll just pick a moment in time in the script, and then I'll know the character's line before my cue line, and then I'll just go into the monologue just to make sure. Yeah, that's right. And so I know a few of us were doing that. I sat right beside Ian, and sometimes Ian and I would run our first interaction in scene 2, or he would be running his lines, and I would just jump in and run with him. Yeah. And he'd be like, okay, let's we're doing this. So everyone wanted to make sure, we were always fully invested in the show, but we wanted to make sure that, Stoppard's words, we got them spot on. But also, up until the last show, October 29th, we were still making discoveries. Yeah. We were still making discoveries. And that is the mark, I feel like, of a fantastic play, but of a really cohesive cast that really wants to...
You're listening to each other. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. I had another thought about it, and I was not in the cast, obviously, so shoot this down if you want to. But I was thinking, that play is so difficult, the ideas in it, that I think everyone started from the same place, which was, what the hell am I talking about?
Jerry, oh my gosh, when... There were I think that first week of table reads, I was driving home thinking, this is the first time I have had imposter syndrome before. Yeah. And in fact, it tends to happen to me at that very first table read. I don't know why, years on. I have been doing this for a very long time. Yeah. And even then I'm like, Jerry's not going to hire me again. He's not going to bring.
I already hired you for 3
No, but I'm just like, what am I doing?
Money in the bank.
I'm like, what am I doing? But I like doing things that scare me. Yeah. Doing Until the Flood, doing the one-man show. I've said this to you a few times. It was one of the scariest times of my life. In one of the scariest times in human history.
In our Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and it scared the ever living mess out of me. And I have a tendency to run towards things like that instead of away from them.
Too, yeah.
And one thing I loved that you did amongst a lot of things is during that table read, you made sure we knew what we were talking about. When we referenced a character, whether it be a fictional character made up by Stoppard or an actual historical character like Lord Byron or Thomas Peacock, you made sure that we knew everything about that character. And that was one of the few shows too where I would go home with my script, bring up Wikipedia, Google, I'm reading, I'm referencing, I'm writing notes.
You have to,
and I think it paid off. One of the many things that I heard from friends, even my friends that English is not their first language, I had two friends who are Costa Rican who came and saw the show, and they said we understood it all. Wow. They said it took them a couple with the British accents, the dialects, and it took a few minutes, but they said we understood it all.
That's great.
And one of the biggest questions they get that we get at the end is who is the hermit?
Yeah.
Most people are like, oh, Septimus, but some people are like, okay, I just want to make sure. Is it Septimus or just they had great questions and feedback.
A very good friend of mine who lives near where I live didn't get that in the show, or didn't think she had got it. But when I said it, she said, "Oh, of course."
Yeah.
So I think she had got it, you received it at least subliminally.
Right, or you can tell people, "Oh, this is the person," and they can start going back in their mind to see those clues.
Working back.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it was a joyful experience for me, and I certainly don't think that would have been the case if I hadn't had that cast to work with. So thank you on behalf of all of that. And then we're after him January 25th through February 11th, and then early March, 2 weeks later, we start rehearsing. You start rehearsing with me for a little night music.
I am incredibly excited to play Count Magnus, the Dragoon, as he's referred to in the script. But I love Sondheim. Anytime anyone asks me to perform a Sondheim show or a song, Sondheim is musical theater Shakespeare.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The man is brilliant. I've been fortunate enough to do a few Sondheim shows.
Yes.
I've done Funny Thing Happened Away at Forum. I played Hysterium. I have done Into the Woods. I was Rapunzel's prince. Yes. Getting to belt out agony every night was one of my greatest theatrical experiences. I feel like
were you in that Assassin?
No, I was. I think I was doing something else. Or I had a conflict, so I couldn't do the show. But A Little Night Music has a very special place in my heart because we did it at NC State, and John McElwee, the late great John McElwee, who I call my theater father, because my training is at NC State, and he had quite a big hand in that training.
Many people's father.
Yeah. He played Frederick, and it was just fantastic. Yeah, it was fantastic, and so now getting to do it, and I remember one of our I forgot Alex Miller, who was in an administrative position at NC State, played Count Magnus, and he was fantastic. And this is the show that I said, okay, years later, at tender age of 43, I get to play this role. I get to do a fantastic solo in praise of women. So I'm very excited about that. But the musical, the songs are beautiful. A lot of people probably know this, but it's all written in waltz and 3/4 time. Right. And it's just, I remember just being backstage and listening and actually waltzing while. So I am extremely excited about A Little Night Music.
He would give himself challenges, right? Sondheim would say, in this case, I'm going to write the entire show in waltz time, which is not, most writers look to tell the story, but for Sondheim, I felt like that to some degree it was about the form as much as it was anything else, that somehow he figured out a way to make the form tell the story.
Right.
And then I think of him as, I'm sure you know this as a Sondheim aficionado, but he also would contribute anonymously to the New York Times crossword puzzles,
Yes.
So he would, I don't mean contribute the answers, I mean contribute the
Right.
puzzles, and they would use them because they were so meticulously well done.
That mind of his, and just and I think I speak for a lot of actors who've done Sondheim. When you get Sondheim, and I will say you're still always searching, but when you get the melodies and because he can tricky rhymes sometimes, or tricky tempos, when you get that in your body, it is a feeling unlike anything else. I can remember the first the Zitz probe for a Sondheim show, and you feeling like you have it, and the musical director is like, we're in a good place. Yeah. You're like, oh, okay. It's just something about it. But anytime, like I said, anytime I can be in a Sondheim show or sing a Sondheim song, I am there.
Good. That's good. That's good. So last question. Arcadia, hymn, a little night music. Is there a thread there? Have you thought about that? Maybe this is too soon to ask.
I have not. Other than, pretty much all shows are about relationship.
Yeah.
Relationships, time, the passage of time. That comes up a lot in Desiree and Frederick's relationship and Little Night Music, but the passage of time in him, the passage of time literally from 1809 to 1993 for Arcadia. So I love doing shows where we just explore human relationships and the beauty of them, the warts and all of human relationships, and that for me is pretty much the through line for all the shows.
I would agree. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Madame Armfeld in A Little Night Music, who is basically looking back at her life, and I think on some level she's seeing different stages of her life in the other women in the cast.
Absolutely,
who are at different stages. Yeah, so it's almost like she's able to look through a time machine and see herself at these different stages, which I think is not unintentional on Sondheim's part.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's right. Time, I think the passage of time and how it impacts relationships.
Absolutely.
As well, yeah. So, but who knows? Maybe by the time we get to the end, we'll have a whole different idea.
Right. And that is the beauty of what we do, right? We can say this is how we see something at this moment in time, and then a week later, a day later, an hour later.
Because we're interpreting it. We're not creating the art.
Right.
We're interpreting it.
Absolutely.
And that means that each work of art that we interpret is us as much as it is anybody else.
And so much of that too has to do with the audience as well. The energy, it is a symbiotic relationship.
What do they bring into the
room? Yeah. And I remember at certain times in Arcadia, sometimes getting laughs on certain lines where we're like, oh, or the audience being like, on certain discoveries.
That's happening in a big way in Moonlight.
Oh, yeah.
There's some very interesting laughs that none of us expected. Well, Byron Jennings, thank you very much for joining us. Hymn by Lolita Chakrabarti opens on January 25th, so not that far away. In the meantime, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, thank you.
Happy New Year to you, and I will look forward to seeing you back at the theater in early January.
Very soon. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.